Righto. Hey, everybody. This is Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and today we're joined by our special guest, Bryan JENCKS. Some reminders before we get on. Uh, Ongoing is Winterfest, the Winter Festival of Artisanal Software. It's a very big deal, both for Eastgate and for the other participants. It's also a good opportunity for people who have been toying with the idea of trying some of this software to actually do it at a pretty good price. Artisanalsoftwarefestival.com. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to join the Eastgate list, where we announce meetups and new Tinderbox releases and other needful things. We don't share it, just go to the Tinderbox page and sign up. There's a new calendar of meetups, which will get the meetups and their new URL and all of those good things right into your calendar, or which you consult whenever you like. Michael Becker has the URL, and that URL is also available in the Tinderbox forum, forum.eastgate.com. And finally, Tinderbox 971 is out, and yeah, you want it. It's got some good fixes over 970, and 9.7 introduced table view and lots of fun fixes. So be sure to stop by the site and pick it up. Now, our guest was actually introduced to us by a speaker a few weeks ago at another meetup. Bryan JENCKS works in research and data analytics and trains people to write code, work with data, and use technology to improve their productivity. He's a big fan of Obsidian and is autistic and ADHD. And we're looking forward to hearing from him. But first, here's Michael Becker.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the new year. Super excited. For those that are new to the community, let me just kind of lay the ground a little bit. What we do during our meetups is we go around the room and new people introduce themselves. Following that, we talk about any individual projects we may or may not be working on, or may be working on, or questions we may have about not just Tinderbox the tool, but personal knowledge management in general, and how do we unleash our creative powers with all of these tools that we have available to us out there in the world. And then we jump into a theme, and today we have a theme with Bryan. So super excited to have you here, Bryan. I've been anticipating this conversation for weeks. And then if time's permitting, we dig in a little bit deeper. So I'm looking around the room and I don't see anyone new today. So that we can get as much of Bryan as possible in our hour and a half, let's skip over everything else, start with Bryan. And if we have time left at the end, we can talk about our individual projects. So with that in mind, Bryan, the floor is yours and take it away.
And enter my lack of bullet points to go off of. Where should I start?
Have no fear. This
All
is
right.
word oriented. This is a word oriented, conversation oriented group. Kick off something, and someone else will agree or object, and off you go. Forget the bullet points.
The random
and on that note,
object.
Yeah, and on that note, maybe we can start with the way Mr. Bernstein introduced you a little bit. Like, what are you doing for a living? How does your personal approach to knowledge management work? We understand you're a big aficionado of Obsidian, as are many of us, and we'd like to learn how you use that tool and what are the various other tools that you use to get your job done. Like yourself, I'll introduce, part of the reason why I found Tinderbox was I too have like ADHD, dyslexia, and other kind of issues too. And I find these tools and using them to compensate for my own issues incredibly helpful. So, any of that kind of conversation you can have with us and how you approach knowledge management would just be awesome to hear from you.
Okay, 2 interesting topics and 3 cans of worms. Excellent.
Yes, exactly.
So, that was like 5 things at once. I took a screen cap of the transcription, so here we go. Okay. I am a big proponent of Obsidian, and even though I do talk a lot about it, it's not necessarily that I'm 1000% tied to the application. It's just the application that works best for a lot of the paradigms that I prefer. And given my intense love and proclivity for usage of Linux, I prefer a plain text approach to just about everything wherever possible. So the fact that Obsidian facilitates that is one of the biggest sells for me, and how it is a tool that allows somebody who is more technically oriented to create their own heavily, like either write your own plugin with JavaScript, or even just doing external tools, whatever. It doesn't matter what you do, because Unix-based systems operate on plain text files. So anything in that paradigm would then work on what Obsidian uses, which is plain text files. So that's like one of the main reasons why I stick with it through and through, is that it, with the interoperability of plain text, it makes my life easy to work in with everything else I already use. But that particular point aside, I really just like Obsidian's very much sandbox nature. There's over 1,000 community plugins now. I don't use more than maybe like 30 at a time, but you can pick and choose your own Obsidian operating system for knowledge management. You can, and forgive me, I'm still getting over a cold, but you can build whatever you want. You're a writer, there are specific plugins that facilitate like fiction writing. If you're an academic, you can pick specific applications and set up specific workflows, templates, and a lot of the workflows and stuff that I talk about do facilitate some level of like research workflow, which is why my Zotero videos are usually more popular on my channel. But you can build your own system. It's like Legos. It's great. And why I think my approach tends to appeal to people most is, I mean, hashtag autism. I mean, the whole point of why a lot of my stuff seems to be interesting to people is because I'm so goddamn detail oriented about stuff, and I get really, really in the weeds. And so I like managing everything about my system. And if most people are looking at things and topics, if they were like the size of, I don't know, a brick, I'm looking at the grains of sand in levels of detail. So instead of just building, you know, a brick wall or a brick building, I'm starting with individual grains of sand when I start to build a system and looking at how everything plays in with everything else. So when I take that approach and then break that down for people in videos, it helps a lot of people understand things, even people who might not have a neurodivergency. But for those that do, I get incessant comments that the way that I portray and convey information really is palatable and easily digested by those people. So I think that's why I've gotten some level of popularity or notoriety, depending on your opinion.
Awesome. And so Elsie, you've kind of highlighted a few of the tools that you use, and you know, Obsidian being one. I heard you use comments of Linux, Zotero. You know, what other tools do you have like in your community toolbox? And I appreciate what you said earlier. You're not really hung up necessarily on Obsidian per se, but rather the fact that it's a tool that helps you accomplish a thing due to a certain set of things that it provides you, which I think is really beneficial, because something Mark Anderson's nodding his head, because we'll often talk about that, on how even like in Tinderbox, you know, it does certain things really, really well. It doesn't do other things. It's, you know, it's not going to make your toast for you in the morning. So, you know, could you talk a little bit about the other tools that you use in your toolbox and kind of what the edges are and how they come together?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not very dogmatic about my tools. I usually say, you know what's working best for you. Here are some other ideas of what might also work. Play around, find what works best. Very Bruce Lee about it. Use what works, discard what doesn't. So I do have a lot of things in my own personal ecosystem. When it comes to Obsidian specifically, and like my direct personal knowledge management work and what I just talk about on YouTube, I'm always trying to pare down and simplify to some degree, but there are like certain things that I keep in mind, such as the issue of backups and like the ephemeral nature of the internet, because I mean, it's always somebody else's computer where this information is sitting on, whether it's some cloud hosting data center server or whatever. So I'm always thinking in the back of my mind about retention, backups, and I might have a queue of 1,000 videos, or I don't know, 200 research papers that I want to read. I'm less concerned with the research paper ephemeralness, but when it comes to something like in an ephemeral YouTube video, anybody or the organization itself could take that down at any given moment. And then that input that I took notes on or gleaned some useful information from is gone. So then what do I do about that situation? So like there's certain applications that help with that. Raindrop.io is one. I actually pay for that one. I try to not pay for a lot of different things if at all possible. And usually because the paywall is a good motivator to find a simpler approach sometimes. But I do pay for Raindrop, and I have for several years, because it does take offline or like backup copies of whatever you take. It's like bookmarks in the browser, but it retains offline copies. I don't know if it does it for videos though, which was kind of my whole point, which is where this giant server rack behind me comes into play, is that I download and back up everything that I care about. And eventually I'll have a 3:2 solution for my backups, but not yet. So Raindrop is a big influx point of a lot of my inputs. If I want to watch a video, if I want to save an article and I don't have the time to get to it, I'll put it into Raindrop. And actually, I have a diagram, because I can't keep this up in my head, that I have for all of these apps of mine.
And by the way, you're welcome to share your screen if you have anything you want to share with us or give us some eye candy.
Sure. I like candy. Share screen. So this is just the simplified diagram. I don't keep this heavily updated, and I can't really make it any better because of the way I inserted this diagram. But Zotero is one point. So like any research papers, they go through Zotero, and then I take notes in Zotero, and those flow through Obsidian through templates and stuff. Articles, so like your, I don't know, BuzzFeed.com, whatever, your online internet articles will go through Raindrop, because I want that that capture, that backup, and retained copy. And I could do that with Zotero, but I prefer a what's the phrase? I prefer a, I don't know, distinction, separation. That's it, separation of concerns. So anything that's not like a formal academic research paper, I don't usually want that in Zotero, just because of the way I prefer organization. So I keep articles and stuff in Raindrop. Books, I have, I don't even know how many books I have in my library right now, probably closer to 1,200, 1,500. So my house is getting in need of more bookshelves. But any digital books, I either use things like Kindle, if they're an academic oriented book, like I read Unmasking Autism by Devin Price, or Neurotribes by insert author here. Both of those have like hundreds of citations to academic papers. And so I might find a digital copy of that and then run that through Zotero, because that's more of an academic oriented text. So you can kind of see, like, I push academic stuff more into Zotero, but books, it could be anything. I could rely on the physical copy, take screenshots of the highlights, and run that through Readwise, which is another heavy player in mine, because I kind of push a lot of different digital things through Readwise, because there is an automatic sync hooked up to Obsidian. And Obsidian is not the only one. Readwise has a lot of interoperability these days. And I like just having everything flow through there. And then it also has the side benefit of anything that you capture through Readwise, you can utilize some level of space repetition for like a daily review of items that you've put into there. I'm not sure exactly what space repetition algorithm they're using. I'm not sure if it's anything similar to what Anki uses, but it's nice, and I just do it as a daily habit. Podcasts, I just did a recent video about this. I do like a lot of podcasts, but I don't usually get a lot of value out of them, except for maybe Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast. I like the Huberman Lab because of a lot of the academic nature and science and evidence-based insights. So usually I lean more towards those types of podcasts where I can actually glean like more evidence-based or fact type of information from, because then that's something that I can actually take notes on. I don't usually get a lot of I don't mean this, but this is like the best word that comes to mind. The more like humanities or opinion-based type of content on podcasts don't really appeal to me as much for note-taking. So yeah, podcasts, I just did a video on like the app I used for the longest time just disappeared, like died. So again, this is why I'm glad I do plain text notes, is because my notes are still here. But a lot of the things that were on that application or their website or their servers, I'm not going to get into exactly what it was, like some embeddable thing, but that's gone. So I have lost something because of this app just poofed. Because money, who knows? I didn't even really get a notification. It's just they're gone now. So further accentuates the whole point of why I prefer plain text is it's future proof. And if it's plain text, you likely own it. I own that. It's on my system. It's on my computers, on my backups. I don't have to deal with a company just disappearing and all my stuff's gone because I don't rely on keeping it on their servers. Or if I do, I have some sort of automated solution to back it up because, you know, 1 is none, 2 is 1, 3 is 2. Like you need to have multiple copies for it to be considered an actual backup. And if anybody works in academia, I'm sure you well know this with your research on multiple hard drives. But videos, which is kind of the last kind of major input for me, I think right now I'm mostly just relying on Obsidian because there's some plugins that just do a good enough job on video notes. But I do have lots of YouTube videos. And so when it comes to this is like the nebulous gray area, is that there's not like a lot of like an app company whose product I use. It's kind of just I have like either I wrote some scripts and they do this stuff for me, and then I kind of tweak some things, and then this is the workflow, but it's not necessarily a specific application, which then connects to Obsidian, and then that's the workflow. There's usually a lot of like intermediary stuff there. So like with videos, I might have the video on my client machine, and then I open up that video inside of Obsidian as just like a local file, and then there's plugins to take notes. But how did I get that video onto my system? Well, I use tools like YouTube DL, which you can't talk about on YouTube or else you start getting strikes, which happened to me a couple of years ago. But I like use YouTube DL to just download entire YouTube channels. I like somebody's particular flavor of content, and I want to meticulously work through every single item that they've ever created, which is a totally autistic tendency of mine. I will just YouTube DL their entire damn channel, and now I have 300 videos sitting in my in a folder, and I will systematically work through every single one of them. And so, like I'm right now in Obsidian, I have a long-term project of mine because my associate's degree and my first few businesses that I created were all in the fitness industry, and I love researching kinesiology and fitness and exercise science. So I have a whole bunch of notes for just fitness and nutrition, health, and all this other stuff. So I went through all of my favorite and all of these really interesting content creators in this particular niche area, and I just YouTube DL'd their entire channels. So I literally got a warning from my ISP that I reached the threshold of my data limit, which technically I have unlimited data, but I guess once you reach 10 terabytes of downloaded data in a month, they start to charge you a little bit extra. So I got a one-time warning, and they're like, hey, if you do any more, this is your 1 month warning. 1 month, in the next month, if you do this again, every terabyte over, or every gigabyte over, or whatever it was, you're getting $10 more charged, up to 10 times. So I could pay an extra $100. So I'm like, oh crap. Well, this month I got the warning, and there's still a lot of month left. We better get all this downloading done this month so that I don't get charged next month. And I did it. So I ended up downloading, I think, probably about 6 terabytes worth of videos from YouTube. And I have my server, so I just run the job on the server and I just forget about it. It ran, I think I went on a vacation for a week and I came back and it was still downloading. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of part of the course when it comes to stuff that I do.
Okay, and what tool are we looking at here?
Oh, this is Obsidian.
Okay.
Okay,
and it's an image you created in some other tool and you dropped it into you dropped this image into your Obsidian notes.
Yeah, I don't like the mermaid diagram syntax. It's too simplistic when it comes to stylizing, so I didn't use that. And then I didn't really, now I could probably just use Obsidian Canvas, but even then it's still not as feature rich as some of the other solutions. So I believe this is just yeah, it's Draw.io, which is a open source free web browser based diagramming tool. And I installed a plugin, or actually, no, I just did an iframe, so some HTML, and threw that in there, and now this is just, it's just there. This is mostly for subscribers or people who look at my published notes to look at. I don't really like mess with this too much. I should probably update it.
Perfect. And by the way, everyone, if anybody else has any comments for Bryan or questions about what he's talking about, feel free to unmute and ask, or jump into the chat and bring it up. So, while we're waiting for other people to comment, I liked a few of your comments that you talked about. Maybe you can discuss that a little bit more. This idea of separation of concerns, and thinking about your approach. So it seems like you have one approach, which is storage, another approach, which is retrieval. And then I do have a question of, how do you then start making meaning of all of this insight that's coming into you? How do you actually start consolidating that up and actually tagging things with citations and managing that whole kind of curation collection process?
Yeah. So I did just ramble about storage and acquisition quite a lot. And I definitely have talked
It's awesome. Loved it.
In the past about the collector's fallacy. So I just downloaded 30 articles and 2,000 videos. Great, you have done this task. You have achieved that. Nice job. But what value has that put into the world? How has that helped you? It might make you feel productive, but you haven't actually done anything with it. Very, very valid point, and very important thing to be aware of in the deluge and over influx of information that we deal with daily. So with retrieval, and it does kind of also equally work in with value production, but with retrieval, I actually had somebody else I was on a podcast with, or not a podcast, but it's actually one of my Discord moderators from Canada. And he and I had a really great chat, him being ADHD as well. We obviously connected on that level and had an interesting chat, but he kind of brought something to my attention where my entire system and my entire approach for things seem to be based entirely on how I structure search. And I optimize my entire system to work for search. So what I mean by that is, if you have, in the classic Zettelkasten, Nicholas Luhmann had, all these like physical note cards, and you could put them on the desk, organize them, have references, and it worked for him great. But we're not limited to the physical medium anymore. So we have all these digital components. So how do you organize that exact type of system in the digital plane? And then you get this entire niche area of the internet where people have endless debates about exactly that. So what I tended to do is ignore what everyone was talking about, or just taking what I thought was useful, and go off on my own little tangent over here. And people started saying, what the heck is that guy doing over there? Let's go look at what he's doing. So my entire system is based on search. And you're seeing still my Obsidian, because if I open up my actual notes up here at the top, you'll see all these different files, ignoring the emojis over here, which isn't important to this particular point. I have like each of these files names begins with a special character, one that is actually allowed by both Obsidian and my file system, because that's important. I've had issues with certain symbols on Windows or on Linux. It depends on which ones, but these ones work. And an ISO 8601 date stamp, followed by the actual name of the paper or article or item. Now, why I do this and why I've done this for like the past 3 years, in general, I always just say, always stick with the ISO 8601 date stamp. For anyone in the UK, I'm sorry, I think your date system, the date stamps, the way that you write it is absolutely horrible. But ISO 8601 is the best standard of all time. Fight me, I don't care. It sorts everything chronologically, and that is the best. So this is why I do this. And each of these special symbols correlates to a particular type of input for me, of a major type. So like you could say, like you could break it out into hyper granularity, ebook, Kindle book, or a physical book. Well, that's 3 things for just for books. You're going to run out of symbols in record time. So I kind of keep it at like a higher level domain. But I can tell you right off the top of my head, the exclamation point, those are tweets or some sort of like digital communication like that. A paren, that is an article. A brace, that's going to be a book. And so by doing this, I can open up my modal search in Obsidian, and I can just start searching by, okay, I'm looking for a book, type of brace. It starts highlighting anything with a brace in the title of the note. So just like that. And sidebar, the whole reason I'm doing this is because I like to build a system that I can build once robustly, kind of like an IT architect, and then it scales forever. And I don't need to constantly be, okay, well, now this has hit some threshold. It's hit the Y2K threshold. I need to refactor all this to make sure that it works, because I need to keep growing. And now I have to rehaul all this stuff. Every single note needs to be changed to work with the new paradigm. No, I started with that mentality in the beginning, and I didn't want to have to do a lot of refactoring and rework on this type of stuff. So this is built in mind to scale. So yeah, I mean, as long as it has some level of chronological sorting in the date, I'm responding to the comment, that's what I prefer, is just because I wanted to sort chronologically just based on the file name. But by searching by this symbol,
Okay. Go ahead.
I want to be able to cut a large swath of information in my system and just immediately filter it down. So if I know if I'm looking for a particular book, bam, there's a brace. I'm only looking at books search results now. And if I know that book happens to be related to probably one of the biggest topics in my vault right now, autism research, well, right there, anything with autism in the name, it's a book, it's going to highlight. So anything works like that. Any particular symbol immediately filters down to just that particular type of input medium. And then let's just say, I know I read this book in 2020. Well, then at the top of my search results is any book from 2020. More results from 2021. So any book starting from that year and then progressively filtering, if I read a lot of books, or more likely if I read a lot of papers or a lot of articles, if I just have an inkling of when I process that, those are 2 strong areas of search that can already filter down the results of exactly what I'm looking for. So I don't need to focus on what folder do I put this in? What if it belongs in multiple folders, which is part of the big point of my system, is that I don't want to have to rely on organizing things into folders, because the common problem I run into is, how do I prevent duplication when something has relevance in more than one area? So this is how I'm doing that very flexible method of search for information. Symbol for type, date for temporal relevance, if I can remember the date, or if I even if it's just the year, that already helps me drastically sift down the results of what I'm actually looking through. And then there's also just the name itself. if I have any inkling about the name, these search terms are additive. So anything I add to this search, so I have 2021 now, if I just add code, I mean, it was already the top result, but there we go. So having a book from 2021 with the name with code in the title cuts down my result to exactly what I care about. If I'm doing that for like input searches, but because it's just the names itself, I could just type code and then I have all these different things. So like it still is just a normal search, but that's like my approach for search in general, is being able to immediately cut through large swaths of information and collected items. So that's like when it comes to retrieval, I'm thinking about that. But what about
Okay,
things that aren't just
can I interrupt?
Mhm.
Yeah, can I interrupt you real quick though? So it seems like your search though is based on name. Do you ever tag anything or keyword them so that you have both name and some other set of tags that you're associating with your content?
Yep. So when I do the naming part of this component, that is for the way that Obsidian does bidirectional linking. So if I wanted to link a particular paper, article, or input note, or as an input as I call them, because anything is an input into this system. The output is what I might create from it, but the notes themselves are connected to inputs, just like a traditional Zettelkasten. So when I'm doing the naming convention of these files, that's usually implemented when I'm trying to link those particular inputs to the notes that I'm taking. Where the tags come in is a little bit separate, but just to tie up the last bit of the last point, that's when I'm just searching for like inputs, formal things coming into the system. When I'm searching just through my ordinary notes, this is where I have a robust name for the notes. So I use annoyingly long file names because ultimately at the end of the day, each of these is just a plain text file. So I kind of try and push the limits of my character limit of what I can do on file names sometimes. And I just give really robust file names, which is usually like an atomic piece of information, atomic notes from Andy Matuszak. Love his stuff. So these atomic notes might have a large claim or idea as the name of the note itself. So here's one of my favorite ones, is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If you brought a cell phone back to the medieval ages, people are going to think you're a sorcerer and probably drown you in a lake. Cool. But this idea is the name of this note. So when I link that in just, in prose, I'm talking about something interesting about cell phones. Any sufficient, oh yeah, that was the idea I remember before when I was talking about that, is that anything sufficient there. By doing plain text search, I can link to that particular note and it reads like prose in whatever other note I'm referencing it in. So by using these exhaustive names, I can do that. I'm not sure what you mean about controlled vocabulary, but maybe it relates to aliases, because I don't have to be limited to just what the file name is. I can add an alias. Like magic is just, actually, I'm probably going to keep this too. Magic is just science we don't understand yet. And so now I could do the same thing. And if I add a bar, then I can have it display just that alias. So it's still the same note, same topic, but just worded slightly different. So I see a hand up from David.
Bryan, controlled vocabulary is constraining the terms that you use. Basically, so H2O in the brain would be recognized as water, steam, cloud, hail, etc. So you don't want to be putting in a new word, a new term, every time you stumble across something you've never seen before. You want to relate it to something else. Periodic table. Think of that. How many, what was it? We're up to 118 atomic elements. So controlled vocabulary is kind of like having a very constrained vocabulary around a discipline. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I guess I take that level of approach when it comes to my tagging system, not necessarily anything related to file names, or the file names when it comes to the inputs.
And
Yes,
that race goes back to the tagging system. Is your tagging your own practice, or because I'm on the hunt, I use tags in my primary application, but I'm looking for something that allows me to tag across applications,
Yep.
across
And
documents.
so when it comes to tagging, I think I like to say that I have a very, I don't know, I think sophisticated is the wrong word, but I have like a very robust approach that works for me, isn't overly complicated, scales, and there only seems to be like two really useful systems of tagging that most applications or companies seem to implement. And that's either nested tagging or additive tagging. So just how I did in the search where I did the symbol and then the date, and then that says, okay, this and this for Boolean search terms. That additive search kind of removes the necessity of nested tagging. So I can implement my system in both. So like I'm doing videos right now for the Skrintle application for sponsorship, and you'll see that if you're watching my channel at all. I am talking about their approach is additive search tags. So I can make it work, but my preference is to have nested tags. So that was all of the stuff for retrieval and linking based on file names and certain organizational pieces of meta information for notes. Now my tagging system in Obsidian, at the top level, this can be ignored. The inbox, these are actually all of my inputs for my main personal knowledge management, Zettelkasten, yada yada. So this is the main for inputs. The flexing emoji and then the laptop, those are two other like whole other vaults of mine. That's my developer notes and my fitness research. This is my actual Zettelkasten and my personal notes. So these two are the main ones. So my approach to tagging is I'm using nested tags because Obsidian implements that and it works perfectly. So I have a inbox. This means that the item is an input. I mentioned that I just treat everything as an input. If it's a podcast, an article, the podcast, an article, a research paper, a book, a tweet, it doesn't matter. It's an input to me. It's an input into the system. So it all gets the inbox. So with that, I can click the inbox and I can see every single one of those items, regardless of what type they are. But then I have a nested tag. And because I do this, I think it started getting even more popular, but I'm more visual because I'm more visual. So I don't even use text for my tags. I mean, it is text, but I'm using emojis, which works in Obsidian and is usually able to be implemented in other applications. At the end of the day, emojis are just Unicode text. So usually you can get away with that, but a lot of people don't think first to, oh, I'm just gonna use an emoji instead of actually just writing text. So I'm using emojis, but you can do text. It's just, it doesn't matter. So I have the inbox, which is just any input. But then inside of that is a nested tag for headphones for podcasts. So if I click that, I will only see podcasts, but I'll see every podcast in my entire vault, every podcast note. And then from there, I actually have colored squares, which really is just like a traffic light sort of organization of, I haven't even touched this note, I haven't processed it at all, or I finished processing it, or it's in the midst of being processed, or I haven't really started processing it yet, or it just needs more connections. Or purple for like it has a reference to another academic paper. This is papers. It has a reference to another academic paper I want to follow up on and also read. So these are things at a glance that, again, cut through large swaths of the information that I've collected and allow me to jump right back into where I was on, say, I got a few minutes. I'm close to finishing up this particular podcast note. Let me just jump right in there, finish that up, and then I turn that yellow square to green, and then it just sorts into this one because I've updated the tag. If I go there, I could just change this. I don't need that anymore. I could just change this tag to the green square, and now it sorts in with all the other ones, and it's done, and that's it. And so by doing that, I can rely on a single tag to organize this into 3 different areas, because each of these nested levels is progressively filtered. So this tag falls into both here, here, and here. I can find it through any of those. But how that might look in an additive tagging system would be I'd add a emoji tag for the inbox, and then one for the podcasts, and then one for the yellow square of processing. What I don't like about the additive system is that means that if I click the yellow square, then that means that every single item, regardless of type, is brought in as a yellow stage processing item. But with the other items being additive, it has the same net effect. It filters to inputs of type podcast of stage processing. It works just fine. And then the actual note tags of mine are even simpler. It's just seedling, fern, and then evergreen note. And then occasionally an item might need to have more links before I feel like releasing it into the wild of this is well connected enough to just float off into my sea of notes. Because I can eventually surface it again through connections because it's related to something. It's not just floating off in the ether, disconnected from anything. Like my information should relate to something else. If it doesn't, then it's just floating out there. Then it's a boat note, which is that one. Which then ties into, okay, that's like loose sort of organic, chaotic organization. Like there's no folders. It's just everything's in a pile, somehow relating to other items. And if I follow the trail of links between files, eventually, according to how these things are set up, eventually I could find myself on any of my files because everything is linked to something. Otherwise, it falls into one of these stages of processing down here. But any of these are linked to something else. But there is a higher level organization to this information, which is where these maps of content come in. And I forget the guy who actually set up that term. I think it was like 40, 50 years ago or something. But I have a particular search for items tagged with the map or maps of content, which is if it loads.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bryan. What was that term you were referring to?
Maps of
The guy-
content or mocks.
Maps of content, got it.
MOCs. And so each of those items that are tagged with the map is a map of content, and then I can relate those to other maps of content, and that gives me a search that I can display in Obsidian's graph of the interconnected nodes of my highest level interests in my vault. So I might have a high level interest in psychology as it relates to autism and ADHD, but I can then go to the note on ADHD and then see all of the notes that are connected to this summary topic note. And so if I opened up the local graph of this particular map of content, then I could see all the items that are related directly to that one. And this is how you could potentially follow that, that trail of interconnected notes to any note that's in my system, chaotically organized. Everything is findable either via my chaotic search method or just by following the trail of breadcrumbs, basically. So if you haven't noticed already, there is autism sprinkled throughout this entire thing.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you take all of this input that you've now demonstrated how you organize and categorize and actually start like writing an article or produce, like what kind of output do you produce? Like, and how do you use all of this input to produce that output? Is it a podcast, an article, a video? I mean, like how does those pieces work?
Yeah. With the giant caveat that I just finished my own schooling recently, and I have been very behind on actually doing much meaningful work with my vault because of too many demands on my very limited executive function. That aside, the usual outputs for me from the system tend to be videos, YouTube channel. Articles are something I'm trying to do more of, but this is a system that's really geared more for writing because of how it is structured when it comes to the bidirectional links, but it can work for other forms of content, writing articles, writing papers, etc. And the other meaningful output of the system for me is not necessarily content output, but it's also just information consolidation and concise summarization of it to help me better organize and externalize my own understanding of something. And so before I get to the aforementioned things, I'll talk about that last one first. So I have a canvas in here, which is kind of just like an Obsidian homegrown diagram. For my current research on autism, I have probably about 30 books that I've been working through and hundreds of papers. And I've been consolidating interesting topic notes on either the symptomology, the presentation, or you name it. I've been organizing just anything of a particular interest, whether it be like vestibular and coordination related, tactile aversions, cognitive differences, visual effects, like you name it. I'm trying to organize it into a comprehensive understanding of something so that when I talk about it, write an article about it, or whatever, I have all of this. So this is one of the things that I started doing fairly recently, which is going through my inputs. I can then create all of these notes on particular topics. Now, these cards might not exist yet as notes, but that's irrelevant. But each of these different squares will eventually be its own separate note in my vault. And what I'm doing right now is as I go through to different inputs, I'd say, let's stop zooming into infinity here, is that let's say I'm talking about preservation. I might read 3 different books and 20 papers that all mention something interesting about the topic of autistic preservation. Well, I could take all of those different inputs onto this card and I could say, plop all those there. I'm going to have some thoughts about this as I have this holistic view of what preservation is. But until I finish processing all these papers, all these books, and drop all these interesting tidbits into this particular square here, I'm not going to have a fully well-rounded understanding of what that is. So inside of this, if I actually go in it, is just a linked reference to the book that I read to get this particular note, and it's got a little block reference. So this is literally pulling out the content that I highlighted from this particular book via a linked reference, which I won't get too down the rabbit hole on linked references and transclusion and whatever inside of Obsidian, but you can do that particular type of action in a variety of applications. So it's not Obsidian specific, it's agnostic. So I could just, anything about preservation, it goes here, which is basically what I'm doing. I have this giant canvas of topics that I then organize into this like hierarchy, somewhat organization. And then I'm going to say, okay, preservation note, drop it into preservation. Alexithymia, let's just drop that into that one. And just all these different inputs, all this stuff is getting dropped into these boxes. Eventually, when I get to a particular goal, which for me is going to be like I finish all the books on my bookshelf. Papers, I'll be a little bit more lenient on, but all the books, I want to finish reading those. Then I have this note. Okay, I got all these different transcluded blocks of content, none of my own words, all stuff from everybody else about preservation. Now I can go in, look at all of those things, particularly just about preservation, and say, now what do I think about this? And start putting in my own content. Do that, but for every single one of these. So now I have all these little tiny atomic pieces of information about these things that I've collected and read all this information on and distilled down to particular topics, and then my thoughts on that collected information on each of these particular topics. Now when I go to write an article or draft a YouTube video script, I can then say, all right, I'm going to talk about the subject of autism. What am I going to talk about? Preservation, alexithymia, meltdowns and shutdowns, yada, 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 yada. And then as I start to talk about these topics, I can then refer to my own words that I've said about this, because I can distill my own understanding of something in the way that I would phrase it, word it. And then, you know, if somebody gets angry in my comments, well, what are your sources for that? Well, here's all of the linked references to every input on that particular topic that I have readily on hand. Granted, I could always just make a bibliography with Zotero on something, but when it comes to a particular subject of a topic of whatever level of nested granularity, I have all this stuff readily on hand now. I think
and where are you putting it, and where are you putting your, you know, just as a tactical fact, matter? Like, where would you drop your Zotero anchor tag in to be able to link this to the reference in Zotero? Are you using tools like Better BibTech or Pandoc, or like how are you linking these pieces together?
So Zotero content into Obsidian with links back to the Zotero content specifically for each highlight is all part of the Obsidian Zotero integration plugin, which I have done probably more videos on that particular topic than any singular topic on my entire channel, because it's such an important part of my workflow and I get so many questions about it, particularly from academics. All this stuff is usually from, I think I'm still working on mostly book notes, so I don't have an article one particularly on hand, but when I go to a particular article, or paper, I mean, paper, and here we go. No, that's a bad one. There we go. So if I go to a particular research paper and I go to one of these highlights, now you see the little gray text here, that means it was used as a transcluded block reference, if I zoom in here. And this is what is popped up when I'm actually inserting that into another thing like in Obsidian Canvas. That's where that's coming from. But this is the actual highlight itself. It's just HTML over plain text, even no matter how it's displayed. But the link at the end, this page one link, which is not part of the actual text that I'm transcluding, but here he is the actual Zotero link to the actual PDF item and the highlight itself. So clicking that, I will have to probably share that. But yeah, it opens up Zotero specifically to that PDF, specifically to where that highlight is in that specific PDF. And so that's accessible even on the canvas. So if it's wherever that canvas went. So if it's linked onto that canvas, which is linking other notes, then here's page 29 from that particular source in Zotero. So I can click that and go directly to that Zotero source. Because this is most of these are from an academic book, which is the Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devin Price. So that is something that I ran through Zotero because I had so many highlights. I wanted it to be able to just take me directly to it. So this page 29 links to a Zotero held digital copy of that book. Click the link, takes me directly to that highlight in Zotero, should I desire that.
Very cool. And do you ever use DevonThink or anything like that, or all to help read through some of these documents, or you're storing the PDFs in Zotero?
I poked around it with DevonThink for a little bit. I tried to play around with it. I mean, you can see that I definitely over-engineer particular things, but I have a reason for doing it specifically that way, which is kind of a trend with me. With DevonThink, I got the feeling or the vibe from it that it was like trying to kill a fly with a bazooka. I didn't really vibe with it very much. I could probably change my opinion if I played around with it more, but what I'm doing right now works perfectly well for me. And I don't have to pay for anything extra, but I have touched it once. Got it.
All right, looks like we got a couple comments / questions from Mr. Anderson and Peter. So Mark, you want to refer to your comment in the chat on dyspraxic stuff?
Oh, okay. No, it was something I hadn't really thought about much until I was listening to this, is that time has taught me that one of the things I struggle with is dyspraxia, in the sense that I can spell, I can proof, and I do it massively for colleagues and friends. I just can't type. I've tried for years. Just doesn't work. Right? These don't do what comes out of here, and that's interesting looking at this, because it's reminded me of how dependent a fully plain text system is on having reasonable skill of input and output. And this is not a critique. This is just an interesting meta reflection on it. I also suffer the same things you do. So I mean, in a sense, so I'm not coming from a different place. I just have a different different facet on it. And that's really interesting. I mean, because I love the sort of structure that you get in this, and it's not that far, funnily enough, when I look at it in many ways from what we're doing in Tinderbox. I mean, what Tinderbox probably offers, especially for those who are less comfortable reading plain text, which is a lot of people, because if they don't have a technical background, it's just, it's like text but with no formatting and nothing, no helpful handholds. That it has the affordance for those who like it of doing that, but it is not wildly dissimilar, and this has been really, really interesting to see. The other thing I think I sort of lobbed into the thing, because you said about refactoring and the way you use your naming system. As much of my work is, well, almost all my time is actually spent on working on other people's data, which is interesting because you don't get to decide. And I think what that's taught me is that what works individually, so internally, what you're doing makes eminent sense. So because you don't have to justify that to anyone, and all the affordances are rapidly to hand, and you can export that. It's interesting how that moves outside one's own sort of memory palace exported to text. Because it's something that crops up. I noticed in the community here, where basically people turn up and said, right, I've given up on everything else, and it doesn't matter they're coming to Tinderbox. They could come to Tinderbox. No, I've given up on everything else. I'm doing this new thing now because everything else is too limiting. How exactly do I use this open-ended tool? Thinking, well, that's an interesting question, because in a sense, it's how you take to it individually. But do you? How much of what you do you think is exportable in the general sense, and how much do you think is personal? And there's no hidden question in that. I mean, it's just a sort of an opportunity for you to riff on that.
And Mark, when you say exportable, what exactly do you mean? Export the content or export the processes?
No, poor choice of words. I apologize. No, that was good that you picked that up. What I mean is, because so often my mind flies to the Monty Python reference, how shall we evolve, oh Lord, in the sense of people say, so how exactly do I do this? We have a sense, most of us, if I just follow the rules, magic will happen. But actually, in terms of knowledge making, I find that's rarely the case. So it's, what of your personal structure do you think readily ports to another person?
I got your meaning exactly. Brief before that, for the inability to type or type super accurately, I definitely have that. My spelling is still atrocious. Or what if you spell the file name wrong? That's why I like fuzzy search. So even if I have progressive searching in Obsidian, like you can see, like right here, I missed several characters and it still highlights generally what I'm asking for, which is another reason why I, again, optimize for search, because I have, maybe to a lesser degree, the same issue. So that's one of my preferences too. For readily portable aspects of this, I actually have a practical answer for you, because when I first started the job I'm in now is several promotions forward, but when I started at the particular government agency I'm at now in the technical team, I got there and there's no formal documentation repository, there's no organization, there's no codified system, there's no, this is how we do things. You could have ideas and improve how we do things, but I'm not telling you as somebody, this is how we do things. Yeah, shocking, I know, right? So me walking into that, I am immediately like appalled and then furiously oriented to, now that is my new job. And I said, hi boss, this is my new assignment. I'm working on this now. I don't know that this is what I'm working on now. So I made that happen, which means then I have to make a paradigm or use what I already know and get other people to use it and justify it. And Bryan, make it make sense. Why are we doing things this way? So is all of this a one-for-one copy portable to another system or another setting, another person? I mean, obviously the answer is no, because nothing is that cookie cutter. You always have to like take bits and pieces of what works and then apply it to some situation and relevant contexts. So is it all applicable? Obviously not. But what kind of concepts are, and what did I implement in my, say, my IT team's documentation, the way that we use it, which is a different context from saying I have a, you know, a journal reading club over here, and we have like shared resources over here, and we do stuff. That's obviously a different context. But for like what I did with my team is I had the benefit of being and playing God. What I said goes, but also keeping people's skill sets and willingness to interact with the system in mind. I couldn't over engineer this the way that I would like to interact with something. So I had to like kind of pare things down. What is the minimum amount of stuff that I can make these people do with the maximum amount of benefit that benefits the entire team and potentially external stakeholders and customers? And really what that kind of boiled down to is, once again, plain text, because it is so easy to optimize for search with plain text, especially with all the tools that are readily out. And given that we're a technical team, it is appalling if you have not had any interaction with Markdown or at least plain text in the technical field. So the fact that some people didn't, I just said, great, you're going to learn. Plenty of resources. I even have a video about it. Here you go. Watch the video. Learn. It's not that hard. So beyond like learn the syntax of simplified HTML, it was just, there were a few tags, but given the technical orientation of the material, it was minimal. Most of that was put into the YAML front matter of Markdown documents. Again, standard sort of paradigm when it comes to like static site builders like Jekyll or whatever. So a lot of it really just came down to what are these simple things from my system, these like atomic nuggets of functionality that work in a technical paradigm that's already super well established, so that I can justify it saying, hey, this isn't some rando new thing Bryan's just making you do that Bryan likes. It's actually part of the standard process for all these other different things that use the exact same thing. Markdown is ubiquitous. It's not Bryan saying, hey, I like Markdown, you're going to learn Markdown because Bryan likes it. Like, no, it's ubiquitous in software engineering. So learn it. We don't have any sort of version control on our information. I didn't touch about that. That is another thing. Backups, but also version control. I have complete version history of my entire vault from its inception 3 years ago. Why? Because I use Git. So I have Git automatically syncing my entire vault on a cron timer. Any changes. So I have the entire history of the entire vault back to its inception. Note number one. But we don't have any Git version control on our technical notes. Well, guess what we're going to use? We're going to use Git, which means you need to learn Git if you haven't already. You haven't learned Git? Good Lord, how do you still have a job in the technical field in this modern day? Government aside, even in government, you should be using version control. So a lot of it came down to just, I'm not a supervisor. I had a supportive supervisor. So I said, hey, your job is now to enforce these things on these people. Not my job, but yeah, it's not a lot of it was portable. It really just came down to, we're going to stick to it really came down to, we're going to have common conventions and standards, and it's going to be enforced that we adhere to them. Markdown, version control, and some level of being able to sift through a large swath of information in an enterprise organization. Now, it might not be like my Obsidian vault of, let's say, 4,300 notes, but we might have several hundred articles about, like, oh, here's a note about one of our servers, or here's one note about our service, and there's just all the information about the service in that one note. So I might tag that with hashtag service, maybe hashtag Python if it's written in Python. And that would be enough, because then you could just like do searching of the file name, that we would just be very descriptive of it. And then everything passes through Git version control, which means we pass through a pull request process, which means that Bryan gets to see everything that you're writing and then give you critique until you get the point. And that's basically it. I kept it simple. Markdown, version control, peer review process, and enforcement of those paradigms from the people who actually had the means to be able to do that, which is really what a lot of it is, the linchpin of a lot of it. But that was probably a very long-winded answer that gave a very simple response. I probably could have cut that down a bit. Sorry.
It was awesome. I loved it. You pulled out a bunch of new tools too that I took note of as we went through that. That was really good. All right, and I'm sure David was loving the idea of common terms and enforcements and all that. David, you got a comment there?
Well, actually, I to the post. I mean, the newness of Git. I encountered automated change control in 1980. Was appalled in 1986 to find that Fidelity Investments, the big dog in this corner of the world, did not have automated change control on their software. Change control was old Joe in the back office in the computer room. I got permission to be in the computer room and speak to him. He knew nothing of software. So roll forward to 1993, the mainframe market had collapsed, and Gartner had put out a note that said across the 15,000 global mainframe sites, no specific definition of what a mainframe was or is, no more than 10% had even purchased a change control tool. My own calling found that that 10% was wildly optimistic, wildly. And now we have the DevOps, what scurrilous word can I not use, thinking they just discovered change control in 2009. I think that's what Wikipedia says, that two guys came up with oh my God, we need change control in 2009. So, and I've yet to see change control applied to the requirements and specifications documents that feed the software process. End of rant. You're right. You're spot on. Somebody else pick up. Wade, save me here. Wade in, Wade.
All I can say is I agree. My world, I believe in that because, just to context, in the networking space, you have lots of boxes all over the place, all of which have very complex configurations and many people able to change them. Anybody who runs a network without change control on your network configurations is, I don't know,
negligent.
fire.
Has a lot of company. Has a lot of company.
Yeah. Yes, change control is very valuable, and I very much concur with the importance for also having change control around documentation. I mean, but let's ask some questions. How much of this is taught in our schools? Why aren't we teaching some of these principles in high school? I got to teach people how to code. Well, I'm not sure coding is as important as teaching people about tools like change control. Personal opinion.
I didn't learn about that in my bachelor's degree on data management and data analytics. So let that tell you that.
But working when I did my website masters, working in a very cross-domain group, so people from pure humanities through to pure comp sci, the most interesting thing and the constant failure of CMS was not the tech, but the willingness or the ability of anyone to understand it to people who didn't have quite a deep technical ability. So it's a social engineering problem, not a computer engineering problem. So, for instance, you take everything you value most and you put it into an invisible folder. Well, that's that's so alien to any other medium you might. Well, if you take all the important papers in your house and you put them into an invisible box, it just doesn't make sense. So, one of the things that's really missing, and I see this continually in the work that I do, is that there's really, really good tech, just really, really poorly explained. And that's one of the reasons that this stuff is underused, because it's like a secret knowledge for the tech club, and it's not that it's so particularly difficult. It's just that no effort is put into teaching wider audience. And I thoroughly agree with what's been just said. Well, why do we teach people this at school? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, going forward, are we about to wake up tomorrow? Well, short of a meteorite landing and or electricity dies or something, probably our present computing will be around with us, going forward. Therefore, it is something you should understand. And I'm sort of amazed that paid management isn't, in a sense, built in more. It's still something that most people have to do as a deliberate act. So it goes back to the opt-in, opt-out. I don't understand why it's an opt-in. Is, I suppose, another way of looking at it. Mark.
3 years, I should get the hang of this. Change up. I'd like to ask Bryan about software design, specifically software design for people who are ADHD, and if there is software design that is suitable in some way or other for people with autism.
Oh, another can of worms. Yeah, and one, a lot of people in that entire field are usually some level or form of neurodivergent. One of my favorite pieces of technology, and God, I gotta really control myself from going down rabbit holes on this topic. But when it comes to reading text, reading long form text or large paragraphs is really difficult for me sometimes. So like the way I got through a lot of my bachelor's degree and reading these textbooks to pass tests, because even though I understood most of the subject matter, because it's literally my day job, my unit at work is data management and data analytics. My bachelor's degree was in data management and data analytics. It was unintentional and hilarious. But reading these long, dry, boring textbooks about subject matter that did not pertain to me or was already outdated, shocker, was difficult. So there's one particular tool that just immediately springs to mind that I absolutely love, and it's Mac only, which is a shame, called Text Sniper. And I'm using an MX Master mouse, which means I have several different programmable buttons on here. So on the side, I have these two little buttons, one of which will actually activate. If you look at my cursor, if I press one, it turns it into the crosshairs, so I can actually scan text, which with Text Sniper will copy the text to my clipboard because it takes a picture, uses OCR, optical character recognition, and copies that text to my clipboard. But I have the other button, which toggles it from just a text grab to clipboard to actually reading it out text to speech. So what that lets me do is I can actually increase the rate of readback on Text Sniper to the rate of intonation that I prefer, which is, I think with Text Sniper, it's like 400 words per minute or something. I usually listen to podcasts at like 2 to 2.5 times speed, just to give you a reference. I can't watch YouTube on anything less than 2x speed. So by doing that, I can just take screenshots of text or of these paragraphs in my textbook with Text Sniper, instead of having to rely on, an accommodation or accessibility tool in the actual material, digital or otherwise itself. I can just use my own tools and apply them to other different situations. So I use Text Sniper every day, even if it's just convenient to grab text, but I can use it to read text aloud to me as my eyes scan the text, which is something I found in the last year or two to be one of the most effective ways of helping me actually read. So like when I'm actually reading just ordinary books, fiction or otherwise, I will get the digital book on my Kindle, I'll get the audiobook, and then I'll listen to the audiobook on like 2.5 times speed as my eyes scan the text in the actual book, which helps give me enough attention given the rate of input into my differing senses to actually keep me focused on the material. Otherwise, if I'm just reading the book, eventually my attention will just bounce off of it and I get distracted, and then there's the phone. So doing that and adding that auditory component of reading is one of the most effective things that for me to actually get me through lots of long form text. And that's just one example. And so when it comes to software design, like it's not that difficult to do something like take a screenshot, save it to a temporary file, run OCR on it, run text to speech on the captured text. I have it, or it's already been on my to-do list. I'm just really behind on things to just write that in Python for Windows because I'm actually sick of all of the accessibility software that my workplace has available for me to run on Windows, which is totally crap in comparison to this very simple piece of software that I use on Mac every day. So it doesn't exist. I'll write it myself. Jesus.
Hey, but what was the name of the mouse that you referred to, by the way? My mouse sucks.
MX Master 3.
I have the magic mouse and I can't stand it.
It is the Logitech MX Master 3, the MX Master series. Absolutely best mice, hands down. I stick with those because they have all these different programmable keys, and it's awesome.
Got it.
I can toggle Text Sniper reading back to me with one button, and then just toggle Run Text Sniper period with another button because it's all programmable.
Nice.
Quick follow-up. What do you use for text-to-speech voices?
Text Sniper, it does that. It's part of the application, so it uses the default voices from whatever is on Mac. But with Python, it's just another one of the standard modules. So they just use these in the system's built-in voice sounds, whatever voices are. Even Windows has built-in ones. It's just a matter of using a program that actually uses them.
You found the built-in voice is adequate.
Good enough. I mean, this is already better than anything I've ever been able to use before. So it's definitely a good enough situation for now.
Chuck?
Yes, changing the subject a little bit. I think I'm probably a little bit unique in the forum of users in that, I'm another one of these people with a data center in my basement. So looking at the server rack behind you, I'm just a little bit curious as to how you justify the electrical expense of that server rack.
Hey, honey, YouTube pays me enough money to pay for all this stuff, so don't ask questions.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all thanks to YouTube.
So is it strictly for video production and things like that, or do you use it for your archival purposes?
Alexa, turn on my Office. No, I decided to go absolutely nuts. So like, I got my bachelor's degree in data management, data analytics. Part of that was taking a lot of the CompTIA courses. You pass the course, you get the certification. That's the class credit for taking the certification. Cool. At the end of the day, I have about $18,000 US in student loan debt for going to that school. Very manageable. Nice. Then taking the network certification got me interested in all this shenanigans, and I spent more on this than my student loan debt for my damn degree. So let that be a warning to you for when you start getting into schooling, that it might not even be your student loans that get you into trouble. That aside, this whole contraption, I have my ISP go to the router, which is just in bridge mode, which sends it to my switch, which is an enterprise grade switch. I think it's like 1 gigabit connections, couple 10 gig SFP ports, but that all just goes to everything else. A lot of what's connected already is just hardline connections to my client machines. So this laptop is connected via hardline, but it does have an NVR, or network video recorder, which is connected to the entire security system around the house, which I'm using prosumer grade cameras. So it's all Ubiquiti and 4K night vision, AI heat sensing, notification sending cameras, absolutely over the freaking top all around the house. If a dog pees on my lawn, I know about it. And so all of that's connected and it's all recorded. So I get about a month of just solid nonstop recorded footage on the NVR. And then all of that goes down. That's just some like storage, empty dead space. The big beefy boy is like 24, like 7 or something, 16 terabyte drives. So that's probably the most expensive thing in there. And I haven't spun it up yet because I don't want to blow out my circuit breaker again. Long story short, there's a project already going on. But eventually, after like a RAID Z2 configuration of all those drives, I will probably have a net of like 278 terabytes of storage. That's net. So after, if it's raw, it's over 320 terabytes. So I'm not going to need for storage like ever again. I got like a one-use server I'm giving to my old boss, who I said, your job is to enforce these people to use Git version control. Love that guy. He's getting a free server because I like him. 2 backup UPSs, and then my actual 2 production machines, which are Dell R720s, Dell PowerEdge R720s. One of them has like 36 smaller factor drives, or 16 small factor drives. That's actually my current NAS running at RAID Z2 on all those drives. And then the other one is my actual hypervisor, which is running Proxmox. So I got Proxmox and TrueNAS running everything. And those 2 boxes right there kind of run everything right now until I get the big beefy boy spun up. You engaged my special interest. RIP.
I thought I might.
So Chuck, do you have tool envy now, or?
I'm kind of on a par with him. I'm not into the video stuff. My son has plenty of cameras around the house, but and he's a police officer, so he tends to have a different view of that kind of stuff. Personally, I'm not all that infatuated with capturing the video of what goes on in my yard.
Well, when I
although
was
the
in
animals
Norway,
at night are kind of interesting. That does get interesting since I live out in a rural area. But
I like being able
you
to
know,
look at my property when I'm in Norway on vacation and see like who's walking around my neighborhood, who's walking near my house. And then my fiance likes to look at all the notifications we get for all the random cats that walk in our neighborhood because I have 6 cats.
Yeah, no, I have a VMware installation and vSAN for storage. I have a pair of Dell R730 XDs that I use for storage system with their Robo version of VMware and vSAN. It gives me a lot of flexibility, but that's largely because I had clients using VMware and I need to maintain currency with what that product is capable of doing before Broadcom destroys them. Anyway, thanks.
My pleasure.
Awesome. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left or so. Does anybody else have any other thoughts, comments, questions? I thoroughly enjoyed this, Brian. I thought it was just fantastic.
And
love to
Bryan,
talk
do
about these
understand
things,
that this
so.
is you're playing on the little box end of things. The I'm on, my interest is on documented, the same as you're documented these undocumented applications. But in my view of the world, a small organization is 10,000 people. Now, granted, it's 185 years old, so they've had plenty of time to not do documentation and lose it on top of that. So 10,000 people just on the IBM mainframe, which your generation doesn't acknowledge exists.
Oh,
My son's generation, and that's 1,000 applications. And since it's in financial services, I assume they have, I mean, the only answer to, well, what kind of shop are you? And people say Oracle or SQL Server, that's obviously not worth talking to or about. The only acceptable answer, I think this was from Texaco, what kind of shop are you? And the answer is yes. You name it, we got it, and you can name a whole bunch of stuff I've never heard of. That's from the IT guy. So anyway, you're on the right track.
Hey, so Brian, in our last 3 minutes, I did have one question that came to mind that I forgot to ask you, was the scalability of your solution. So like, how many notes do you have in here? And, is it able to scale to tens of, like the Obsidian interface itself? I mean, are you able to search on tens of thousands of notes, thousands of notes? Like, what's the scalability of that overall experience?
Right before I answer that, I do interact with mainframes. We have SCO for payments in the government, so I already do have to deal with fixed width input files to a COBOL mainframe. So, but
oh dear, I've been reprimanded.
But the system itself, in my current vault, I have about 4,300 notes, but I've seen people in the forums who have like 40,000 and still have no issues, and they don't even implement the things that I've implemented. So they're just relying on base search instead of any of these like higher level order search methods. So 40,000 notes and still not slowing. And then, yeah, I mean, you're gonna eventually just be limited probably by the Obsidian application itself, maybe at some point, because it's an Electron application. So, I mean, if your computer is beefy enough, it shouldn't matter. But I mean, that's kind of like the solution to anything. If at the end of the day, if when in doubt, throw more RAM and CPU cores at it. But yeah, I mean, I haven't had any issues, and people with 10 times as much as me haven't had any issues yet. So,
okay, awesome. All right. Well, on that note, I think we are hitting the top of the session. And Bryan, what a great way to kick off the first of the year. I mean, this is was awesome. Loved every second of it. And hopefully we can have you back one of these days.
Sounds fun.
All right, everybody. Thanks much. Congratulations, and we'll see you in 2024.